sir. Yeah, I think it's fine. Yeah, no reason to stop it and start it. One big thing. Yeah, I agree. Makes it easier to keep track of. Yeah, it's working, so make sure the volume. Oh, okay.
The little one. I think it's, we'll check it. Michael, come in.
I now call the Norton City Council Committee Work Session to order Monday, May 7th, 2018, time 7 p.m. Would you please rise for Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silent prayer?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We call the roll, please.
Mr. Gaynor?
Here.
Mr. McGlone?
Here.
Mr. Courant?
Here.
Mr. Towsley?
Here.
Ms. Whipke?
Here.
Mr. Kernan?
Here.
Mr. Pilat?
Here. Under committee work session, general topics of discussion. The first item is medium dump truck box for the Ford F1 or 550. Mr. Courant.
Yeah, it's my understanding that we're just separating out the legislation for the two different parts of the truck that we had approved and then realized it was actually two separate parts. One thing to point out about this is there's legislation already moving on the truck, and this box should probably catch up to that legislation. If that can be accelerated by waiving some readings, that would be my recommendation. Thanks to Charlotte.
Yeah, I think that's the way that we need to go. We need to make sure they both pass on the same night.
This will be on the agenda for next council meeting.
That's my recommendation. I will not be here next Monday. I'll be out of state. But
Motion.
okay. So I'd like to move at this time that we place the medium dump truck for Ford 550 on next week's agenda.
I'll second, but I'd like to ask a question real quick if I could.
Sure.
This was budgeted for, I assume, and it was, when we spoke of trucks during the budget, this was included in that, I assume.
This particular truck was not. However, there is enough money in the lease budget line to handle this purchase, this lease purchase.
So that'll come out of the line. I don't know if you remember back then, we noticed there would probably be extra, and I had asked that it be specifically for trucks. That's what this is coming out of?
That's correct.
Okay, great, thank you.
And as Mr. Grant mentioned, this was actually lumped in with the other piece of the ordinance for the actual truck. So this is just splitting it out, so there are two separate items. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Courant?
Yes.
Mr. Towesley?
Yes.
Mr. Gaynor?
Yes.
All right, next item on tonight's agenda is property and casualty insurance. That falls under my committee. This is just a annual renewal of our insurance. It has gone up slightly, went up 1.6%. And given everything that's happened from the economy to police cruisers getting hit and things like that, we've also added a number of trucks, so not bad at all. Anyone have any questions on it? The actual total price is $93,487.
I don't have Scott, I don't have a question on the quote or anything, but does our insurance, I'm asking Mr. Messner, I think, does our liability insurance cover all city employees using those vehicles and our equipment and everything? This is what this is covering, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if a
Part of it.
person is part-time even, is that insurance policy also covering part-time personnel? Is there a set number of hours that would, the criteria that would include that person? So if a person worked 2 hours, would he be covered under that insurance policy? Not him personally, but the equipment he was using? Or if he worked for the city 5 hours a week, would he be covered?
Are you speaking of part-time or seasonal workers?
Anybody, yes. Anybody who's working for the city in any capacity and using our equipment, the city's equipment, they are covered under this policy, correct?
Employees of the city.
Any
Employees.
employee of the city is covered.
Now, if somebody comes in and another person, they get on the rig and, and there might even be coverage, something for that, but I don't want to venture down that bunny trail.
No,
And
no,
it
I-
does-
Even seasonal employees are still considered employees.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
They're working from a period in May till early sometime in September, and they're working 40 hours a week as seasonal employees.
and if a person, if we wanted, as a city, wanted to add a person onto that policy, so that person could use the city's equipment, would he be covered if he was considered a part-time employee of the city? Just for an example, if he was paid $1 a year, could he be considered an employee of the city in order to be covered under that policy?
I would say if there's a specific situation you have in mind, because it sounds like there is, we should probably talk about, maybe not right now, so we have a
That's
chance
good.
to.
That's fine, yeah.
So we have a chance to actually look at it. My inclination is to say we wouldn't want to add someone to our insurance policy through a $1 payment, but it just depends what the facts are. And
Okay.
Probably not appropriate to try to
No.
figure it out here on the council floor, though.
No, I just was curious. Okay, that's
I
fine.
would think that basically if they were operating machinery under the authorization of the city, they should be covered.
Well, first and foremost, talking about seasonal workers, about the only thing that they are permitted, they have to be at least 18 years old, have a valid driver's license, pass the background check for driving and all that, deemed safe drivers in that. At that particular point, they would have coverage to drive the pickup trucks. That's pretty much all they do. They do not get on big rigs and stuff like that.
Some of that requires CDLs and stuff.
That's correct.
I'll get with,
Okay.
And none of our seasonal guys have
Yeah.
CDLs, so.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion on this? Hearing none, I will move to add this to next week's council's agenda.
Second?
Motion and second.
And also, just so that, just for a little further I think we were talking earlier about possibly waiving readings on this. So,
Yeah, as Mr. Messner pointed out during Board of Control's meeting, this actually will be backdated to go into effect on 4/28. So we'll probably need to waive the readings on that. And emergency language, I believe, is already in it.
I believe it was. Yes, it is.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Pelot?
Yes.
Ms. Whipke?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Next item on tonight's agenda is OPWC application for Fraser Park. This, I'm going to turn over to Mr. Fowler. Just briefly, what it is. I know that it's,
We can, or I can take it either way. So I think we could
Yeah.
we could probably take them together, whether it's both the Fraser and the Brentwood Park. These are the package plants that are being eliminated, contemplated from the time we were doing the sewer agreement that those package plants would be eliminated. And we'd already, which Norton Acres has already done, using the same structure. We agreed in that sanitary sewer agreement to fund a minimum share, which is the $50,000 minimum share, which is allowing Barberton to submit this application to get hopefully some grant funds to help them eliminate those package plants. And the same request is being made for both Fraser and Brentwood under that agreement to make that minimum funding share of $50,000 for each project.
And we're looking for Ohio Public Works for that grant to do that minimum share. Is that correct?
Well, by us funding the $50,000,
Then
it
we-
gets points for the
okay,
application.
for the
It's a higher
application.
scoring application,
Okay.
which would hopefully make it eligible
Gotcha.
for favorable funding.
Right, okay.
What's the value of the grant, do you know?
I don't know what the value they're applying for. We can find out, but I don't know offhand.
Okay.
And it's Barberton who's making the application.
Correct.
Right.
That's correct.
Okay. And these funds come out of 127, I read? Is that,
Out of the 127, that's correct. Sanitary sewer fund.
okay.
any other discussion on these?
Mr. Peel, I'll just to flush that point out a little bit. That's because this is an elimination. It's not sewering a new area. It's an
Okay.
elimination. So that's why we can do that. So.
Okay.
Any other questions or discussion on these two?
Is there a time, is this time sensitive? Can it go?
Is it July 1st? July 1st.
July
is the
1st
application
with
deadline.
all of PWC.
Yeah, so I would say we could do full readings. And,
Okay.
Yeah.
take the normal process.
Okay.
One thing before you move on, in attending the meetings, I probably missed, it's probably already been talked about, but this is for Brentwood and Fraser. They're not hooked up presently, are they, to the Barberton sewer system?
No. Package
No,
treat-
they're independent package treatment plants that treat the wastewater on site. Due to their age, there's significant structural issues with several Fraser structure. And therefore, what they'll do is they'll eliminate that plant and they will pump the sewage to Barberton wastewater treatment plant.
Yeah, that was my next question. Immediately, then, those lines, all of them in Brentwood and Fraser, will go into the Barberton sewer
Correct.
system, right?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
The Norton Acres plant is set for bid 1st of July this year. So probably 6 months or so after the construction commences, you will see the Norton Acres plant will be demolished.
I was wondering about that also. Thank you.
And as Mr. Markey commented, this was in the MOU agreement with Barberton. Any other discussion? I will make a motion. Can I make a motion to add both, or can I keep them separate to add?
Just to add them, I'm okay doing both.
All
Just to
right.
add. I mean,
I make a motion to add both the Fraser Park and Brentwood Park resolutions to next week's agenda.
I'll second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Pelot?
Yes.
Ms. Whipke?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Next item, recycling apron bids. We had received grant funding for our recycling program, and the project was designated to go ahead and pave the apron out here in front of the recycling bins. And I believe it's $12,850.
Yes.
And it's a reimbursable grant.
So each year we apply for the grant dollars from the recycling program that was set up here in the city several years ago. And it just allows us to take care of some little projects here and there, just make it more convenient for people by paving over there, makes it a little cleaner. Any questions?
Can I just make it
Yep.
real clear for the residents that this is a 100% grant?
Yes.
We will be, as the mayor said, we will
It's
be
reimbursable.
reimbursed. Thank you.
Before you go on, could we back up here for a minute? We were wanting emergency language in the insurance.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's all.
I don't believe it's in there. It says as soon as, by law.
I mentioned it when we were discussing it with emergency.
So
So
we're-
even if it's not in there, they can,
Add it.
yeah, when we get our version next week.
The
That's
version
what-
I have here that I printed off had it in here.
Yeah, that's
the
mine
emergency
does too.
language.
Mine does.
We'll double check it and make sure it has it.
It doesn't say upon approval, signature by the mayor like the other ones do. The one that I have in my packet.
Oh, you're saying it's missing the language and signature by the mayor? Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah,
So-
I'll make sure that language gets in. Sure,
Yeah, because the original page has it on there, but yeah,
yeah.
okay. All right, back to the recycling. Any other questions on that? Hearing none, I will make the motion to approve the bids for the apron and add that to next week's agenda.
I'll second.
Is there, I know like when we did the parking lot out here, we had specific timelines, things like that, because of going into the busy season. Anything that's going on with this that we should be aware of that,
My only wish would be at least by the end of the month, only because the longer we wait, bicentennial fast approaches in July. So if I can get it done by the end of the month, then I can get it scheduled in June.
Get it
Because we're going to have some work to blend it in. So if we can get it by the end of the month, that's fine. I mean, it's not
all right.
super urgent, but if I could get it by the end of the month, that'd be great.
That would be with emergency then, and we'll probably end up waiving probably the third reading, so. Roll call, please.
Mr. Pelot?
Yes.
Ms. Whipke?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Next item is legal services for First Energy bankruptcy. This also falls under finance. Everybody should have received a letter calling out the specific hourly rates. How is his name pronounced?
Oh,
Anthony
DiGirolamo, I think. DiGirolamo.
DeGirolamo.
Yeah, DiGirolamo, yeah.
So,
Mr. Peel, I can give a little detail on this if
Sure.
you want. Just so, as everyone's aware, Norton Energy Storage has a lease with the city for the old mine, and there's a lease and an agreement in place. And Norton Energy Storage was included within First Energy Solutions bankruptcy filing that occurred last month. My firm does work for First Energy Solutions. Norton Energy Storage is a related company, so I can't give legal advice on this issue. So for that reason, I talked to Mayor and Robert to seek out a secondary counsel to advise you guys on how to proceed in the bankruptcy proceeding with respect to that lease. And so that's where this proposal came from.
Thank you. So nothing's been decided with it yet. We don't know what First Energy, what their direction they're heading. So, but this will just give us representation at the table and
Right.
make sure that the city's interests are,
Any rights you do have get protected.
yeah. Any other discussion on this? When is the next, like, court hearing, or when would this need to be in effect?
I would say, so I don't know when the next hearing is, but I think there's a period of 60 to 90 days after the bankruptcy is filed where it's pretty important to get in there and assert any claims you have. So my recommendation would be that you move pretty quickly on this, and just because of the nature of the bankruptcy.
And that's kind of what I was thinking. Usually the sooner you get your foot in there, then the better. So I would be asking that we waive second and third on this, and it'll be with emergency, and I will make the motion to add that legal services on next week's agenda.
Second?
Motion and second. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Pelot?
Yes.
Ms. Whipke?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Next item on tonight's agenda is Income Tax Review Board. Mr. Towsley.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you recall, I believe the last time we were together, Mr. Kernan had brought forward the name of Mr. Thomas Marino of potentially being interested in this review board, and in the time since, Mr. Marino has furnished us a letter that should be in the packet, I believe, of interest. Mr. Marino is qualified, willing. We need the spot filled. Anybody, Mr. Kernan, you have anything further you'd like to add? Or?
He was also on the
Charter
review and served on that. When I approached him, he was very interested in helping the city out and taking what I think would be the last seat on this board, so we'll have it filled at that point. So other than that, I thought he did a good job on charter review, and I think he's qualified, as Mr. Towsley said, so I would recommend that we appoint him to this board.
This is the last seat.
It
Yes.
would be, yes.
And it's for a 2-year term.
Yeah.
Right. Any further comments? Then I will make a motion to add this to next week's council meeting.
Second?
Motion and second. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Towsley?
Yes.
Mr. Currant?
Yes.
Mr. Gaynor?
Yes.
Mr. Pelot, I just wanted to make one comment after the vote. Just wanted to say, I know that all the seats are filled now. Should there be someone who's a Norton resident who wants to come forward and fill the third seat that I'm currently occupying, I'd be happy to step back and let them take that. So although we filled it and we're able to operate now, more than happy to step back if there is someone else who's still interested in serving. So.
All right. Thank you. Next item on tonight's agenda is Little Boulevard petition. Ms. Whipke?
Thank you, Mr. President. The residents of Little Boulevard have come forward and they've all signed the petition, so there's 100% participation, stating that they want to be included in the Nash Heights sewer project. The way I'm understanding this, they're going to be allowed to have these assessed on their property taxes for 30 years?
That's correct.
Okay, and does that mean that they have to start the assessments right away like everybody else?
Yeah, yes. Yes. It would be certified this year along with the rest of the assessments.
Okay, do we have to do something special with that, or can we?
There would be a resolution or ordinance. I think, what do you have so far? You have the ordinance so far, right?
Okay, yeah.
So the ordinance you have before you is the resolution necessity plus the ordinance proceed, the first two stages together. Because it's a petition project, you can combine them. So when you go to the levy assessments, we would have one for Nash Heights and one for this project, two ordinances. That would be done at that time. That would be the only additional procedure. is levying those assessments by ordinance.
And their assessments are going to be 13,500, and that's higher than the 11.5 or 11.2 due to the fact that we have to pay for the equipment to come back. And if it's going to be any more than that, then they would also be responsible for that amount,
No, 13.5 is
the maximum.
that's in the petition, so that's the maximum.
Mr. Powell.
The contract is very specific to the amount. It won't be more or less. When I talked to Rudzik, they're pretty certain on the amounts going to be assessed here. I mean, the amount for the installation is certain. So I understand the concern. The fortunate thing about Nash Heights, there hasn't been many change orders, and due to limited utilities, there's not many conflicts. So it really should be at the 73,630 or 653.05.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
We're estimating that to be $73,653.05. So with what their contribution, they'll be contributing $67,600, which $6,153 then will fall to the city.
I've got a couple questions, if I could, real quick. The first one's really more of a request. In the legislation, the ordinance, it just says what's on file with the clerk. For my peace of mind, could we put the amount in that legislation?
Sure.
I would appreciate that. And then also, I know we're comparing apples and oranges, but I just want to make sure with Nash Heights, we could not move an emergency putting the sewers in. I'm assuming this is a different situation.
Say that question. I'm sorry. Say that question.
When we moved forward with Nash Heights, we could not do emergency language to put those sewers in.
Correct. This is a petition project, so the residents, by petitioning you, have waived the right, any legal rights they'd have to protect themselves from procedural defects under state law. They've waived those rights. So you can combine phases. You don't have to follow the notice rules. All the things we had to do for Nash Heights, they've waived.
Okay,
So you
great.
can proceed quickly.
Couple questions. It goes on for the 30 years. That's at the interest rate. That would be, there would be interest on that, correct?
That's correct, yeah. So the interest rate, just like you would do the Nash Heights assessments at the
Same
rate of
thing.
the loans, it would be the same thing for these
Right.
assessments.
They
And
would have the option to pay the 13.5 up front.
That's correct.
And the other question is, if you divide the project by the 5, it comes to 14,730. And you said the petition says 13.5. I don't remember all of the discussion the other day, but weren't we assessing them 100%?
No, part of the discussion, from my understanding, was the city picked up part of various sewer projects around the city here. The city picks up a portion of that, whether it was Nash Heights, whether it was Cleveland Maslin. The city has taken on a portion of that on every project that I'm aware of, including Long.
Well, because they were all forced projects.
Yeah, and the people didn't say they wanted it. The one time we had anybody come forward wanting it was down near you when they wanted the water lines, and
Right.
they were going to have to pay 100%.
But again, I mean, this sewer's another part of our city. Anybody that works outside the city is paying an extra 0.5% income tax to the city for sewers, for the development and the implementation of those sewers. We're talking, what was it, $6,500 to finish off an entire section of the city. There's
Well, except-
one other road there, I think, was not.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, there's one road that is not. But again, it takes care of that, resolves that, and continues to move the city forward.
Let me ask you a question, Justin. When we had that water line for Shellhart, did we had to do engineering on that and paid for it up front before and told them how much it was going to cost, right? Mm-hmm. So here we got the engineering already done, which kind of is unusual
Yeah.
for a petition.
For a petition project, right. The petitions usually protect the city, so in the event you front some costs, you can go and recover them.
And I think it was about $10,000 we spent on that engineering
Probably,
for Shellhart.
yeah.
So the point is that
That's a
we've
plus.
already saved them $10,000.
I just said this is a little bit unusual for a petition. The engineering's already done.
Okay, well then I have another question. Brookside Court wasn't included. And of course, Golf Course Drive said they wanted out. Since equipment's going to be back here, if those people come forward and they all say they want in, then they're going to get the same deal?
I don't even want to speculate on that. I mean, whatever deal's given, right, council has to approve the deal. Whatever the deal is, it's what you guys determine the deal to be, right? So, since no one's come forward at this point, I'm assuming they're not interested. I don't know.
Yeah, but they're going to have the equipment back now, so they have time.
Right, and if somebody comes forward, we'll deal with that when the time comes. But you know, we've discussed numerous times up here that we need to find out and define a specific number that the city's going to pick up on future infrastructure expansions. Though we haven't come up with it, the 6,500. What is that? There's how many parcels? 5? So
It's about $1,200.
yeah, it's a little over $1,200 a parcel is part that the city's picking up. Pretty small piece.
Anything else?
That's my understanding, that it wouldn't be quite the same on Brookside, and that's why it was sort of left alone, because it's more problematic getting the sewer to that area. The lay of the land is not sufficient. It's not the same as on Little Boulevard. So that would be, as you said, it's a thing of its own and would have to be considered at that time. But I think it's a completely different project.
But Brookside wasn't left alone. They were included, and then we removed them just like we did Little. So that's why I'm saying if they come out now and say, hey, we decided we went on this deal too, then we're going to have to honor it. That's all there is to it, even though that it had an influx on the overall cost for everybody.
Right, and it would be addressed the same way. I mean, it would have to be 100% petition signature driven.
Anyone else? So I make a motion to add this to tonight's special agenda with emergency language and looking to waive readings.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I second.
Would need to be either
That's what I thought.
Dennis McGlone or Joe Kernan.
I'll second.
Motion and second to
Thank
add
you.
this to tonight's special agenda, waiving readings. Any further discussion?
So just for Mr. Towsley's comments, I'm going to add to paragraph E at the under section 1 at the end. The estimated cost of the petition improvements are $83,653.05, which is the construction cost plus $10,000. And then in paragraph F, I'm going to say the council adopts the estimated assessments of $13,500 per benefit unit, just so it's written out and clear within the ordinance what you're approving.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy.
Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Ms. Whipke?
Yes?
Mr. McClone?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Next item, tonight's agenda is unfinished business, Western Star Cemetery fencing. Mr. Fowler, would you like to, we saw your various bids that you provided to council for different styles of fencing. Would you like to go over that? And do you have a recommendation one way or another for that? Or are you still looking for more quotes?
There are a couple thoughts I have on that. The one quote is plastic, the other quote's metal. I tried to do a little bit of a variety of, some of the quotes we got seem to be outlandish, 16,000 to do fencing. Just the materials alone are varied. I don't have a recommendation right now. I think it's something that should be discussed a little bit, and the Parks and Cemetery Board should have some input to what we're doing.
Oh, I didn't realize they weren't involved in this. Okay.
Well, on the one from Lowe's, there's a note down at the bottom of that one where the price for $13,000 is subtracting $6,000. Was that for installation or something else?
Just give me 1 second, please.
There.
Yeah. It shows the original quote of 13,647. Then there was says minus 6,000, and it has a price of 76.47 handwritten. Beside it, it says Roberts Fence by estimate.
Do we need to check with Mr. Hess, Mr. Fowler?
Hold on, I'm pulling it up. I'm trying
Okay.
to see what it is here. I didn't have that in my packet, so I have to
Yeah.
look it up.
Yeah, no, I didn't mind.
Pass that down. Just pass it.
I will confer with Mr. Hess.
I'm passing you my
sure.
copy there.
Better not to speculate.
I was looking.
Because looking at this, I mean, I don't have a breakdown here, but they're talking installation and everything from Lowe's. So I was only guessing here that this removal, the 6,000, is that we would be installing it as opposed to Lowe's itself.
I'm going to ask Mr. Hess, who procured those quotes.
And that's fine. If we can go ahead then maybe kick that back to the Parks and Cemetery Board and get their recommendation, or if they have something else that they want to go with.
Scott, if I could, I've been talking to some of them, and I know one's in the audience, and I believe she's in favor of the aluminum fence for sure. And I believe there's a resolution coming up from the Parks and Cemetery Board concerning this. And I'd like to go over these quotes completely because they're pretty not self-explanatory at all. And I'd like to continue going over them if I could.
Well, I would suggest that we wait until we actually get the recommendation from Parks and Cemetery Board. Then we can go completely through anything, because there's some in here that's plastic and.
Well, like Charlotte, not interrupting you, but like Charlotte just mentioned, Lowe's. I don't know where she got the. I must have missed it where it says installation and material. I don't see that on Lowe's.
No, there was a little handwritten
No. I know what you're talking about there. I'm talking about, there's nothing in that quote. I've read it several times. There's nothing in that quote, though, that says the 13,647 is for parks and installation. It says price includes all labor, material, delivery, taxes, and permits, but there's no material listed. It doesn't say if it's aluminum, vinyl.
Right. And Mr. Fowler said that we'll have to get with Mr. Hess and get clarification. Yes.
Yeah, please. It says right
It's
on the
aluminum.
quote. It
It's
says right on the
aluminum.
quote. Installation, mark and prepare hole locations, install posts, backfill holes with concrete, install fence material, including gates, hardware, and fasteners. In the notes and product description, it says install 489 feet of 4-inch or 4 feet high Providence black decorative aluminum fence and perimeter of the cemetery. Price includes all labor, materials, delivery, taxes, and permits.
Yeah, I read that, Mr. Fowler. But there's about 4 or 5 different brands of that fence. Some of them have some of them are 3 horizontal structure to them. Some of them have 1 at the top, some have 2. There's no, like on the other quotes, there are specific descriptions
right.
about it, like size of the post.
If we can just get full clarification on that, and again, I think it's prudent that we kick it back to the Parks and Cemetery Board. We let them look at them. We get their recommendation. I mean, that's what they do. I mean, that's their position, their job within the city, is to come forth with a recommendation. If you do have questions over the quotes that are in front of us, I mean, we can always come in, we can sit down, go over them with Mr. Fowler, Mr. Messner would be able to walk you through them. You can give me a call, I can help out, and if you have any questions, just send them there and they can get those passed on to Mr. Hess if there isn't something clarified within the quote. But I still think that it's should fall under the Parks and Cemetery Board to come forth with a recommendation.
I had one other question. It's not actually about this fencing, but when I was looking at the custom fencing companies' proposals, they were talking about taking down the fencing that we had already had, that we had taken down, and they were going, the chain link for $500, and they were going to haul it away. We took that down. What did we do with it?
It'll be at the service garage, is my assumption, Mr. Hess.
Oh, so we still have it, either that or we'll put it up for salvage or something, use it elsewhere. So in order,
I think there were parts that were just destroyed, were not able to be used ever again. They needed to be.
Right, so that's something that we could actually take to the salvage yard, right? Wouldn't that type of fencing be able to go for that, if nothing else? If there's nothing there that can be used, I'm sure some of the fencing might be able to. So we're not going to be able to get started on this or do anything with it until after it goes to Parks. So the idea that Mr. Gaynor had of having this done before Memorial Day is probably not going to be taking place. And I would just remind everybody that we need something about the repair for the headstones. And that's coming from Parks too as well, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, are you guys working on that right now? She said yes.
Yeah, I know that she had some couple prices.
Mr. Fowler, did you forward these pricings, these quotes to the Parks and Cemetery Board?
I have not.
So it would be difficult for them to look them over if they don't have them, right?
My instructions were to send them to the city council, and I did as instructed.
If you would please go ahead and pass them on to them so they can take a look at the various styles that are out there. And if they come back with a different recommendation other than the fencing that we have quoted, or they believe that they have a fencing company that's cheaper than, if we can get a quote from whatever company that may be. Ms. Mullins, I don't mean to put you on the spot. Do you have any idea when you guys are going to be coming forward with?
We're meeting next week.
Okay.
We have our meeting next week. And can I make a comment?
Yeah, if you would come up to the mic just so she can get everything on tape here.
I'm sorry.
Denise Mullins, 2886 Wilbanks Drive.
And
At our-
you're a member of the Parks and...
Yes, Parks and Cemetery. At the last meeting, I know we had discussed different price estimates and just repairing the fence, which Mr. Fowler mentioned was irreparable. And Mr. Fowler had mentioned a price of approximately, he said he was getting estimates of about $7,600 for the aluminum, and we were all very excited and in favor of that, and we had not had any visuals or further details, but at that point, just to hear that that type of fencing would be available for us, we were all in favor of that, and I think we were hoping that council at that point would proceed beyond that. So I don't know if there was a miscommunication with our notes, that that idea wasn't conveyed for council then to proceed. I didn't think there was an option for us to see 3 different types of aluminum fences, but just hearing that price, which was, we thought, so reasonable, we were elated by that and very much in favor that it should proceed.
That was the impression I got. I was at that meeting, that they were all gung-ho for this type of price. If this 7,001 is what it is we're looking at.
Mr. Messner, financially, is there any, what's that?
It's not budgeted.
I understand it wasn't budgeted because of
I thought
the
that's
tree
what
falling. No. Do you have an area where you're thinking that maybe the funds could come from to pay for something like this, whether it's 7,600 or I think one of the quotes, I'm sorry, you guys got my thing now. I think one I saw was 13,000 something.
It was the 7,600, but I think that the labor and installation was 13.
Okay. And would we be looking at doing the labor ourselves, or is that beyond the scope of our personnel? I mean, I know putting in fencing can be difficult, make sure that it's the right height, lines are straight, everything like that. So if that's beyond something that our personnel has experience with.
What about the bicentennial grant money? Can't use any of that, or is it all gone?
We pretty much have that set aside for the various pieces and expenses.
What does Parks actually have in it?
If it's $8,000 or less, I'm reasonably sure I can find those funds.
All right.
If I could, that's the reason why I was wanting to go over these quotes. Even if these quotes are sent to the Parks and Cemetery Board, I don't believe they're going to be able to understand them any better than I do, and I've went over them 10 times, and that's why I wanted to ask questions about the quotes. The one being the $6,000 minus, is that quote going to be $13,647? Material and labor and everything included? Is it going to have $6,000 removed from it? I don't understand what the $6,000 Robert's
What they
fence-
just answered. The 6,000 was the installation.
From who? Installation from who?
Lowe's.
From
I'm
Lowe's?
guessing it was a
Why are
verbal.
they taking $6,000 off of it? Is what I don't understand.
They're saying if you want to buy just the fencing, it would be $76.47.
What's the reference to Robert's fence by something? I don't know what the last word is. I can't read it.
Estimate.
Okay, if it's by estimate, what's that? I don't understand what that term means, by estimate. B-U-Y, not B-Y, but B-U-Y estimate. What does that mean?
If we're just buying the fence, is what I'm understanding.
You're just buying the material.
It's not saying, I'm sorry, it just does not say buying
I
the
understand
fence.
that.
It says by estimate, if that word is estimate.
He just answered your question, though.
How?
That's what you're double checking
He said
for,
that's
Mr.
what the
Fowler,
6,000
correct?
was. Mr. Fowler, can you please restate that?
Well, I sent a text to Mr. Hess to make sure that that's my understanding, and I have not heard back, but that's my understanding. That's what I believe that to say.
Okay, so if it's originally 13,647, labor and material and everything and installation included, and we're taking $6,000 off, what are we just buying the fence? Who's going to install it then?
They were giving you the option, giving the city the option is what they're saying.
Okay, so
that's why I asked them if they had the personnel that was qualified to be able to do that, and I got the impression that we do not. So you would be looking at the original quote there of 13,647.
Okay, that's one question answered then. So we have one quote that's $13,647. This other quote from Custom Fencing is $16,550 labor and material. It also says, all it says is 4-foot-high black aluminum scalloped picket fence. There, according to, just for an example, Fence Town online people have two different quotes, one vinyl, one aluminum, different posts, different everything, and one of them is a total of $7,457.65. Does Mr. Fowler, does that also include labor and material to install it and everything? Because I can't see any place where it lists that.
No, that would be for us to hire a landscaping company or someone else to put it in.
And we
That
don't
was-
have a quote on that.
Not yet, no.
Okay, so we're talking a minimum there of just for the material of $7,400, $7,500, and on the other Fence Town quote of $14,750.80, does that not include installation?
No, those two quotes would not be for installation. The
Okay.
14,000, someone had asked me to inquire about vinyl fencing that looked like wrought iron. So at someone's request, that's what I did, and that's where I came up with that price. We have Mr. Hess and I have discussed talking to several companies. We asked 2 fencing companies in the area to give us a quote. We couldn't even get them to quote the project. So we're trying to find someone that's willing to do it. We've even considered going to the laborers union and hiring laborers as a means to accomplish this through the trades association.
The laborers union are just that, really. They're laborers. They're normally not skilled enough to do this job in the laborers union. But there are unions, carpenters and joiners. But anyway, the other one is custom fencing, and we're talking to $16,550. That is, I believe that's not, that's installed black aluminum scallop picket fence, but that does include, I'm guessing, that does include the total cost of the fencing and installation. Is that correct?
The 16,550
Yeah.
also included them removing the fence that we've already removed.
No, that does not include it, Charlotte. It's another 500.
Oh, okay, yeah, you're right.
It's another 500
17,000.
if they include that. But without that, I'm guessing, just from reading this, just a blank paragraph there, a small, short paragraph, take down, remove, and eliminate that. Installation of black aluminum scallop picket fence, they're saying, in the words that they're saying, they're only installing it. They don't say anything about the price of the fence. They just say installation. So I hope to God they're not saying that it's $17,000 or $16,550 just to install it, because they haven't listed any type of fencing. Just 523 feet, 4 foot high.
4-foot-high black aluminum
Yeah.
scallop picket fence
Yeah.
is what they're saying.
Yeah, but they're installing that, according to that, Scott. They don't say that they're furnishing it.
It says right there, furnished material and labor.
Where am I looking at?
right there above the 17,000 written out at the bottom.
Material meaning the fence and everything, I guess, because they didn't, the other quotes listed individually, 87 pieces. I find that it's going to be difficult if we're depending on the Cemetery and Parks Commission it's going to be difficult for them to understand these quotes and to make a recommendation. Without maybe Mr. Fowler having the exact information for them, maybe, I don't know. I don't see how, they don't have a meeting till the 16th. So for certain, almost certainty, this job is not going to be done by Memorial Day. Plus, it's more than likely not going to be done at the rate we're progressing for the centennial purposes either, is all I'm saying. If we don't move this along, like we don't have, and I'm not blaming Mr. Fowler, I'm just saying we don't have the pricing for the installation of these fences. I mean, we do on the one. If we
Let's
were,
do this.
know.
He'll talk to him this week. We have a meeting next, we can talk about it before we vote. Is that all right there? Mr. Fowler,
Yes.
find out some information.
What day's your meeting next week? Next Wednesday? All right.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
so as soon as we get that, I mean, we can act on this. Once we have a firm direction that we're going, we can act on it, and then it can be up to the administration to see how quick that they can get it implemented and get it installed.
Well, I'd like to recommend then that it be included in the agenda for the next,
It'll be on the next work session.
We'll talk about it at committee before we vote.
Well, it won't be on the next regular
It
council
won't be on it,
meeting
but
because-
we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I really hate to muck this up, but how necessary is a fence? There's no neighbors. Would decorative landscaping or shrubs suffice? It seems like it's going to make it beautiful, I understand that, but we have a park with no neighbors really on any side, so it doesn't need to be protected from neighbors walking across or, I'm just throwing that out there that,
whose house is that, Paul, right beside of it?
I don't know, but there's like a wood line between them.
All right, well, that's something else that we can discuss there at the next work session. We'll wait to hear back from the Parks Board with an official recommendation of which fence that they feel is best way to go. And if everything is not spelled out on that quote, Mr. Fowler, if we could get clarification for any of that, if they need Mr. Hess at the meeting, I'm assuming that you guys will take care of that and arrange that.
Can
you come back up to the mic? I'm sorry.
Going on your comment, should I bring up before the parks? I mean, I can bring up before Parks and Cemetery instead of having a physical metal fence or whatever, to bring up some type of, I don't know, arborvitae or whatever you're suggesting that possibly would be more
Unless the rest of
cost-effective.
council's totally opposed to that.
I think it's worth you guys looking at all the options. So,
One thing to consider, though, depending on the weather, if they're not continually watered, especially in the first year, if they die, then it is very unsightly looking.
yeah.
So there are pros and cons either way.
Okay.
I can say from the meetings I'd been to, and I've been at all of them, that they were all gung-ho for that a cemetery should have a fence around it.
All right. Then we'll just wait to hear back from them. If you could make sure, Carrie, that that's on council's next committee work session.
Okay.
And like I said, if need be, to try to, if the if we can squeeze it in there and get the timeline to where needs to be, then we'll do everything we can to get it done by Memorial Day, but if nothing else, by the bicentennial. T21 legislation, Mr. Krant.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. The short version is that this is legislation designed to prevent the sales of tobacco products, vaping products, any type of method of inhalation of tobacco, and regulate it by the health district. It would give enforcement powers to the health inspectors to regulate the businesses selling. This has nothing to do with catching someone who is under 21 and penalizing them for smoking. It does have an impact on the retailers. On the packet insert that you've got, it shows the amount of people who smoke, it breaks it down by age group, and shows the estimated financial impact on the retailers, which is somewhat the purpose of this. I mentioned before, perhaps, or maybe privately, that I think they fell short when they made this, and I would like to have seen, and I know they have developed it since, the economic impact on a community, on employers, of the impact of that age group smoking at an early age and how that affects later in life. What is economic impact? And I know it's tremendous. So it's a deterrent, although right here clearly it states that they will find a way to get it in many cases. Personally, I'll reveal a little of myself. If I would have not smoked in college, I'd have been a lot happier and healthier today, but it was for 5 years. Had I not been able to get them, I think that probably would have been a plus. My personal opinion as a pharmacist and a healthcare provider is this makes sense, and it does address the vaping, which is an evolving thing that we are looking at nationally, but it gives our health district the enforcement power to reduce the sales, at least until we know more about the effect of vaping. And truthfully, more and more is evolving that says it's a very bad thing.
And the T21 legislation, who else is considering that at this point?
City of Akron has already approved it, is my understanding, and I'm not sure if Barberton did or not a week ago, but
There's a list.
Is the state looking at it?
There's the list here on this far left-hand corner of the blue page that says Tobacco 21 process map for implementation. It says cities and villages. Each city or village passes their own individual T21 ordinance and establish, and then there's a list, but I don't know if that's
page 2.
Yeah, I just didn't know if the state was looking at this or just leaving it just purely up to the cities.
got it.
Okay.
I don't have an answer on that. The other thing to bring to this discussion is we don't have legislation that is prepared for us at this time. I am recommending that we look at it, but being on the Board of Health, and we are having a Board of Health meeting this Thursday night at 5 p.m. in Akron, I will be asking a representative to come to the next Committee of the Whole to discuss this, somewhat like we had our superintendent of schools come and discuss issue 2.
Mr.
And
President.
that will be on 5/21/18 Committee of the Whole. Yes.
I have some strong feelings on this, and I'd like to state those now, if I may. I'd like to preface my comments by saying I do not participate in the regular use of tobacco products, nor did I when I was in this age demographic. But I do participate in freedom every day, and this is of utmost importance to me. First, I'd like to talk about the business aspects. We have 2 counties within 5 to 10 minutes of us who are very business friendly. They don't go along. Our residents simply go 5 to 10 minutes in either direction. Our sheet told us it would cost the businesses $108 a month. They based that on Akron. I'm assuming they think that would be for everybody. I disagree with that. If you're going to go buy your cigarettes in Wadsworth, you're going to buy your lottery tickets, your snacks, your gas, your energy drinks, etc. I believe the cost could be tenfold. On top of that, there's a $150 implementation fee to every business simply because they're there. So basically, the first year, you're pushing $1,500 tax on a business just because they're in your community. Norton, whether it's fair or not, has had a name for being not business friendly, and this would only damage that, in my opinion. I looked into these numbers because you look at the numbers and they're kind of convincing. But I started to look at them. I'm going to read directly from the sheet. It says, pays off. A sales age of 21 across the United States would save society an estimated $212 billion over a 50-year period. So I looked up how many residents we had in America, and it was 326 million. So I divided 212 billion times 326 million. It came up to $650 spread over 50 years for each American. Divide that by the 50 years, and that's $13 a year that each of us would benefit from this. My freedom is worth a heck of a lot more than $1 a month. And that's assuming that those costs of the cigarette user are divided equally by all of us and that they don't bear the brunt of that. I think it would be less than $1. Also, the fees that the retailers have to pay, they're likely going to pass on to their consumers and the price of other products. So it's likely it could be a complete wash for just the regular person. So we'd be giving the freedoms away for this demographic for nothing, potentially, for absolutely nothing. As far as freedom goes, in my opinion, this is just an end around to take the freedoms away from legal adults between the years of 18 to 20. The 26th Amendment of the United States declares 18 the age to vote. In other words, they're old enough to make pretty critical decisions according to our Constitution. Those decisions include putting us in our seats. And those people would be eligible to sit in these seats. How ridiculous would that be for an 18-year-old being sitting up here making this decision right now? If they're qualified to sit in the seat, I think if they're an adult, we should treat them as an adult. I don't condone any of these products, but I condone adults being treated like adults, and I condone freedom. I think this is a very slippery slope. Today, it's tobacco for an 18 to 20 demographic. What freedom is it tomorrow, and for what demographic would it be tomorrow?
Are you done?
I am done.
Any other comments?
I do. I have many of the same feelings that Mr. Towsley does. I think if this is going to take place, it ought to be by the vote of the people. We're telling people who are 18 years old, you can't go buy a cigarette, but you can go across the seas and die for me. I don't feel that I should have that right to do it. They're old enough to join the military and have those kinds of responsibilities. I don't think it's our part to be telling them that they can't buy a cigarette.
Well, just for the sake of argument, and I don't know how I actually feel about this yet, don't we tell people that every day when we tell them that they can't go buy beer? Same thing.
And that's already law, but I would argue they're taking a bullet for their country.
But they do get, don't they get to drink at 18 now? I mean, the 3.2, or did they do away with that?
There's no 3.2.
I don't know. I quit drinking many years ago.
Nope, 21. All right, any others? Yep. My feelings are pretty similar to Mr. Towsley's, and I didn't start smoking until I was 18, and whether I could legally purchase them or not would have had no bearing on whether or not I smoked. Yeah, I paid a pretty substantial price for my smoking, but That being said, if an individual can be drafted, if they can go to war and fight for this country, I think they can make a choice whether or not they can smoke. We let them vote for the president of this country, but we can't let them make their own decision on whether or not to smoke. Makes no sense to me. But we will have Summit County Health Department here on 5/21/18 to give a presentation on this and a little more detail than what Mr. Krant went into. And I respect your opinion, Mr. Krant, and you having smoked before and being in the healthcare, you see the big picture and probably have a more thorough understanding of that big picture than most people do. But we'll go ahead and get some more information on this at the next Committee of the Whole work session. Next item, Charter Section 660.03, and I believe
That's a code, isn't it?
you, Mr. Towsley?
I had brought it up.
Yeah.
And I've got to be honest, I'm a little confused on this because privately, Mr. Fowler and I had spoken about something a little different. So would you mind just giving your recommendation to council?
Just for council's edification, we had some situations recently where some refuse accumulated on a property due to the zoning inspector having to post it, wait necessary time frame. Sometimes takes 10 days. One of the discussions that we've had at the administrative level is making a recommendation to council where if the following two conditions exist, we would be able to expedite the removal of those trash items. Number one, if the residence does not have trash service, so we would contact Republic and ask them if 123 Smith Street had trash service. If that statement would be negative, meaning they do not have trash service, then we'd go to the next evaluation, which is the residence occupied? Are there signs of occupation? If the answer to that is yes, then we'd wait the necessary time frame. But if those two criteria were no, then we would ask that either 2-3 days, somewhere in that neighborhood. I'm not asking for an immediate turnaround, but somewhere in the 2 to 3 days that we could pick it up. One, because we know Republic's not going to pick it up because they don't have trash service. And two, if the property looks vacant, as Mr. Towsley had. I think we've had two in your ward. Right. Where the residents vacated and the trash stayed 10 days. It just is something to consider. We want both criteria. We feel both criteria would give us the coverage to say, if they have trash service, well, then either a tenant or a landlord, someone is keeping up on the property, so we could make a call to Republic and have them pick it up. But if they don't have trash service, then the next step would be, occupancy.
And this is for the public safety. If somebody moves out next to you, and they throw out all kinds of food or whatever, and they leave it out at the curb, obviously it's going to attract rodents, things like that. You have the smell, especially as summer months come along. If nobody's living there at that point, they've walked away from it, and they've left the neighbors to deal with it. So this just allows us to expedite it. We would go ahead, go through the criteria there. We would get the trash removed and assess the homeowner, I'm assuming, to be reimbursed for whatever the trash company charges us.
And Mr. Towsley, I know this is not exactly the section we were looking at, but I mean, it's a discussion that we wanted to have with council to understand some of the trials and tribulations we have. We want to afford individuals the due process, but when the house is vacant and there's no trash service, it begged the question of, okay, the poor neighbors are the ones that are stuck with trash that gets knocked over. The most recent issue was that the animals knocked the trash can over and were eating the garbage. And so we were trying to, one, be cognizant of the property owner's rights, but also cognizant of the neighborhood. So we were trying to identify some criteria, and by all means, those aren't absolutes. Those were the ideas that we discussed that we felt comfortable coming to council and saying, if these two criteria are met, we should be taking action a little more expeditiously.
Yeah, I think the only reason that this piece of the charter section was brought up was just as a place marker. If you guys are looking at a specific ordinance or something, then by all means, maybe we could add that to council's next committee work session.
Yeah, could we maybe request that whether it's a new ordinance or a revised ordinance, that maybe Mr. Markey could have an example for us that we could then look over?
We just wanted to have that discussion. I didn't want to go through all that effort and council say, well, what are you doing? I'd rather have a discussion of where we think we want to go, and if there are objections, I'm okay with that right now. That's why we brought this up. Mr. Towsley and I had that conversation, again, because he had two instances he brought to the administration asking us to facilitate a resolution. It just seemed like to me, 10 days was too long.
Well, particularly when the weather's warm. And to your point, if the home's vacated, no, it's not getting picked up until that time period, so.
All right. Any new business?
Yes, I just wanted to, I wanted to make certain that everyone knew that Denise Mullins was appointed to the MAD as a director on the MAD, Mosquito Abatement District. She's our new appointment.
Any other new business? Topics for next work session, we've already discussed several of them. Do we have any public comments? Anybody sign up?
We signed in.
Okay.
Public comments?
Were you guys here for the little? Okay. I think that's it then. We'll have a special meeting following this, immediately following it, to address the little ordinance. Meeting adjourned. I now call the Norton City Council Special Council meeting Monday, May 7th, 2018 to order. Time is 8:17. Please rise for Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silent prayer. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mr. Gaynor?
Here.
Mr. McLone?
Here.
Mr. Courant?
Here.
Mr. Towsley?
Here.
Ms. Whipke?
Here.
Mr. Kernan?
Here.
Mr. Pilat?
Here. Item on tonight's agenda is introduction of new legislation, Ordinance 61, 2018. For its first reading, Ms. Whipke.
Thank you, Mr. President. I introduce Ordinance 61, 2018 for its first reading. Ask clerk to read it, please.
An ordinance declaring the necessity of and determining to proceed with the improvement of Little Boulevard between Shellhart Road North to the cul-de-sac by paving, grading, constructing, and installing sanitary sewer and sanitary sewer manholes, all together with the necessary appurtenances thereto, all in accordance with the petition submitted by the property owner of the benefited property and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. We've pretty much discussed this just a little while back. Anybody else have anything that they would like to say at this time?
I've got a couple questions, believe it or not. This will probably be more for Mr. Markey, but maybe Mr. Fowler can help me. Well, here comes Mr. Markey. When we changed this legislation, did I hear you say it's actually going to be 83,000 to 10,000 in case there's difficulties or something?
It's the 73,000 plus $10,000 of mobilization costs that was being, so that 13,500 amount, the 11.5 plus the 2,000 for each property to mobilize and get the trucks back out on site.
So could someone tell me the bottom line, what the cost to the city beyond the Little Boulevard would be?
Am I saying that right?
$6,153.05.
Plus 10, so 16.
Yeah. So it'd be 16,000.
16,000. Yeah.
Okay, and
Ish.
I guess that leads me to my next question. If they're charging us for mobilization, why does this have to be passed tonight? Why can't this be passed next week? Because we're going to get charged for the mobilization anyhow. My issue, as it always is, we're introducing legislation, and we are spending $16,000 of the rest of the residents' money, and we're introducing it tonight. And sewers is a very touchy subject, as we know. I just would really feel better giving residents. I don't know how this would offend someone, but very well it could in Nash Heights or where else, and I think they deserve a voice.
Are we spending 16,000, or I thought it was 6153?
It's the construction cost plus an additional 10,000, so it's 83. Whatever that number is, plus an additional 10,000.
So they're saying that the remobilization is 10,000.
An additional 10,000.
So this estimate of 73,000 really isn't the cost.
It's 83,000. It's the construction cost plus mobilization.
That was the cost in February.
Right. That was the cost in February.
So it's 83.
Correct. Mr. Fowler, can it go a week? That's the.
It can go a week. I mean, the concern that I have, again, I'm indifferent to what council's decision is. So meaning yes or no, I'll do whatever council decides. My concern is we're running up against the pavement contractor that's going to be coming in the next, hopefully, 3 weeks. So if I have an idea of our direction, I can continue, because I told them I would at least give them a feel where we're going, because we need to still order supplies. We need to order manhole. We need to order, some pipe. So if I'm the contractor, I'm reluctant to do any of that until this is passed. So I understand. I'm not opposed. I just want you to be cognizant of where we are and the time.
So the way we came up with the 13.5 was as we did the 11.5, which we had talked about was going to be what we were going to assess in the rest of Nash Heights, and added 2,000
For mobilization.
per
Correct. That's where 13.5
parcel
came
for the
from.
mobilization.
That's where 13.5 came
All
from.
right. So, in fact, the assessed portion is that we're assessing them is actually less than we were looking at when we were looking at it being 73. I mean, the city's actually paying more money for this.
The fraction has decreased. That's correct. So I can get you it's just dividing the two numbers.
No, I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
So we're looking at 20% of the 83,000 would be the city's cost, roughly.
5 times 5.
Is there any negotiation with the construction company there on the mobilization?
I will say this: it was a little bit of a struggle to get them to maintain the current bid price per unit. A typical mobilization is 5,000 to mobilize, 5 to demobilize, so 10. I'll ask, but I'm not optimistic because we kind of beat them up on the per unit price for the installation.
So they answered the question that was asked before. If you use the 73.6, the resident portion would be 92.5% of the project. If you increase it to 83.6, it's about 81.3. So it's about 10% more covered by the city of the project cost.
Any further discussion? Anybody care to make a motion on this? Or weigh in on whether to wait or?
Well, apparently I didn't understand what this was being said until Mr. Towsley put it the way that he put it. And I would I don't really want to pass this tonight. Put it up to waive the readings.
I'll agree with Charlotte. I didn't know about. I was confused too. Now you get it.
I mean, I was under I thought the 73, that was it.
Right, but we had talked about the remobilization fee in addition to that 73 figure. We just didn't know what it was until this point, so. We wait a week. Everyone good with that? And we'll just leave it as its first reading this evening. Throw it on council's next regular agenda next week for its second, and hopefully waiving the third at that point in time. Any other discussion on that?
It's a first reading only.
Next item is we will be going into executive session. This time I move to enter into executive session to conference with an attorney for the city concerning disputes involving the city that are subject of pending or imminent court action as defined in ORC 121.22 G3 and Section 3.12 of the Norton City Charter. That's my motion.
I'll second.
Motion and second, and just for everybody's understanding, there will be no legislation taking place after this meeting other than to adjourn the meeting. And if you are going to stay, keep in mind that the mics will be on. So unless you want your conversations recorded, you might want to step out in the hallway. Roll call, please.
Mr. Pelot?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Ms. Whipke?
Yes.
Mr. Gaynor?
Yes.
Mr. McClone?
Yes.
Mr. Courant?
Yes.
Mr. Towsley?
Yes.
I would like to, at this time, to invite Mr. Fowler, Mr. Messner, Mr. Markey, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. President?
Yes.
At this time, I'd like to abstain from the discussion due to the fact that it is Albrecht Incorporated, and that's an employee that I work for, or employer that I work for.
Very well. This time we'll enter into executive session. Yeah, I just didn't know what that figure was going to be. I didn't know what it was. Right. Right. And that's what it was supposed to be, except for the remobilization.
Right.
I was under the impression that they were going to put that piece.
They've already packed up, they've gone home, so in order.
That's all right.
At least we figured it out.
Yeah, 7 days from now, I mean.
Yeah.
Then we can vote on what it is.
13.5.
Thank you, Carrie.
If you have any questions, email me. Okay.
Did you see that? It itself anyway, didn't it? Or did, I don't think he does it.
Hey, have a good night.
Justin added these two things. Oh, we're not doing this tonight.
No.
Never mind.
Okay.
But it has changed.
Yeah.
Per Mr. Towsley's request.
Yes.
So I just threw those in.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Where he wanted them.
Okay.
So-
Okay.
So there's nothing for you to sign tonight.
Well, it's committee of the work session, committee of the whole anyhow, so we just had the special meeting afterwards, but it's okay.
imagine. Not me.
Feel lonesome? Oh, good.
Meeting adjourned. Not even sure why you came back in, Robert.
I was looking for the mayor.
Still here. That's right. No, I'm still here.
Okay, jeez.
When you weren't in here tonight, are you okay?
These are for us, right?
Damn late games aren't over until midnight.
You betcha.